Hello, my name is Alyssa. I'm the Administrative and Visitor Engagement Coordinator here at the Seward House. And tonight is our last night of Haunted History Tours. If you weren't able to join us this year, I am so sorry, but I hope you're able to join us next year. I am going to be one of the ghost hosts for the tours this evening, and I am here to give you a little behind the scenes look at one of the stories that we tell. This story in particular is about our lovely Miss Fanny. The portrait behind me is her posthumous painting, which was done by Emanuel Leutze after she passed away October 29th, 1866, just 2 months shy of her 22nd birthday. Now, not only does the story involve Fanny, but it also involves another beloved citizen of Auburn, Harriet Tubman. So after Harriet came to live in Auburn, she befriended the Seward family, and her whole life she had visions. She saw visions, she heard voices, because of a head injury she sustained when she was a child while she was in slavery in Maryland. Well, these visions helped her throughout her time on the Underground Railroad, and they didn't stop just because her time on the Underground Railroad stopped. So, this night in particular, October 29th, 1866, Harriet Tubman stepped out of her home, a little bit further down South Street from us, and looked up at the sky and saw death in a chariot headed south toward Washington. She continued to look up into the night sky, and a few moments later, death returned, this time carrying the body of a young woman that Harriet knew very well in his arms. He was carrying Fanny's body. So Harriet then ran to her pastor, screaming, "Miss Fanny has died, Miss Fanny has died," and the two of them ran to the front doors of the Seward house, where the news had just made it to the family that Fanny had passed away at age 21 of tuberculosis. So that's your little bit of a sneak peek, a little behind the scenes. Next, you're gonna see some of Jeff's tour in action, so stay tuned for that.
1865, the night Lincoln was killed. You would have had a guide point out to you the bloody sheet in that room, the bed sheet covering William Henry Seward, one of the few things to protect him from the knife of Lewis Powell, a co-conspirator of John Wilkes Booth, who steals into Seward's bedroom and stabs him to ribbons, leaving him a bloody pulp in his bed. Miraculously, he survives, and the family cannot bring itself to get rid of this bloody sheet. It's like a totem. You might think that odd, but it's actually not all that unusual. Victorians were obsessed with death, last rites, mental mores. Everyone wants to know, of course, from that. What do they say? What's waiting for? What's next? You probably all know the events of April 14th, 1865 pretty well. Seward survives his injuries. Lincoln does not. Shot in the back of the head at Ford's Theater by John Wilkes Booth. Now, what about the others who were attending the show with Lincoln that night? His wife, Mary Todd, never the same. Not long after, of course, she's here, visiting through Auburn and Moravia to connect with mediums, psychics, trying to talk to her husband, President Lincoln, again. The Lincolns had invited General and Mrs. Grant to be their guests at the theater that night. The Grants made their excuses. They're exhausted. Mrs. Grant doesn't much care for Mrs. Lincoln's company. Few did. And they send a poor substitute, a man named Henry Rathbone, dashing young colonel, something of an aide-de-camp to Grant. This was supposed to have been the night of his life. An evening of theater, a comedy show with President and Mrs. Lincoln, and he was permitted to bring his young fiancée. Her name was Clara Harris. They were both from Albany. They were a bit of a strange couple. Growing up in the state capital, both of them lost a parent young. He, his father, she, her mother. Strike that, reverse it. His mother, Rathbone's mother, meets a young man, a Mr. Harris. They marry, and young Henry and young Clara grow up side by side in the same household as stepbrother and stepsister. Many think it's inappropriate then that as they get older, they have a fixation for each other that turns into romance. They hope perhaps that with the coming of the war and a separation, much like Will and Janet's, this might end itself naturally, but it doesn't. Love perseveres, as it did for Will and Janet. And at the end of the war, this couple is intent on marrying. And so off they go to the theater that night in the carriage with the Lincolns. A band plays Hail to the Chief. They're seeing a delightful show. In fact, it's in the third act, second scene, when the actor Harry Hawk delivers a great laugh line. The theater erupts. It's so loud with raucous laughter that few can hear the discharge of Booth Derringer at the back of the president's skull. But Rathbone hears it. He's there. At the last second, a shadow flickers by his eye, and behind him he sees Booth standing, gun raised right behind him. He leaps, too late, to try to stop the assassin. Lincoln slumps over. Rathbone grabs a hold of Booth, trying to stop him, trying to apprehend him. Well, Booth, who's Derringer is a single-shot gun, can't shoot Rathbone, but he draws a 7-inch knife, and as Rathbone raises a hand to try to catch Booth, he stabs him under the elbow and takes the blade all the way to his armpit. He soon loses so much blood that he passes out, but not before shouting down to the pits below, "Stop that man!" As of course Booth leaps down onto the stage, delivering the last line of his career, now having killed Lincoln, six-tempered tyrannus, thus always the tyrant. Rathbone collapses, Lincoln is down, Mrs. Lincoln cradles her husband, and Clara cradles Henry. The door to their box has been jammed by Booth. It takes time for the guard to break through. By this time, the president is beyond help. But Rathbone is saved. He actually will be okay, at least physically. He never mentally recovered from something like that. In the days and weeks that followed, Rathbone was troubled to say the least. He blamed himself, and he suspected that everywhere he went, everybody blamed him too. Why weren't you faster? Aren't you a soldier? How could you not have helped? As the days and weeks went by, Rathbone began to believe that every person he saw was whispering about him, pointing at him, judging him. His wife said it was like life in a fishbowl. And yes, I said life. Despite the trauma and tragedy, Clara marries him. They'll have 3 children. In order to make the voices stop, Rathbone turns more and more to the bottle to silence them. He calls drink his demon. He's soon no use to the army anymore. He's discharged in 1870 and given a sinecure, given a position as a diplomat to a legation in Hanover, Germany, where he goes to spend the next 13 years of his life. The demons grow louder, the voices grow louder, and soon they began to tell him there's only one way to end this, yes, curse that you've bestowed upon yourself, but now your wife, your children, your family. You've ruined the Rathbone name, and the only way to save it is to end the Rathbone name. Yes, yes. So on Christmas Eve, 1883, his young children all tucked and nestled, thoughts of sugar plums perhaps in their head, becomes armed with a pistol and a knife. His wife, who has seen his bouts of violence before, knows the look in his eyes, sees the danger, and she lures him away. He shoots, he stabs her, the children take flight. They're all safe. Clara dies. Rathbone, in a rage, takes the knife to himself, stabbing his own body repeatedly. Once again, as at Ford's Theater, the gunshot victim deceased. The stab victim, self-inflicted, survives. He will spend the next 30 years of his life in a German insane asylum, dies in 1911, and in 1951, 50 years later, is exhumed. He has been visited, would visit, and cremated, and not visit his grave. The curse was not Henry's alone. Clara shared in that curse as well, obviously, but also in her own way. Just as the Seward family could never bring themselves to get rid of the sheet, she could never bring herself to get rid of the bloody, stained dress that she was wearing that night, coated in her own and perhaps for Lincoln's and her husband's blood. 1 year to the night, April 14th, 1866, Clara's back in Albany. Her husband is God knows where. She never did. And she hears something just after 9 o'clock. Well, right around the time that Booth had stepped out during that last line. She can smell theater. There's lights coming from somewhere, the closet, where the dress is. She hears the joke. She hears the laughter. She hears applause. And finally, from almost next to her bed, she hears Lincoln laughing out loud, the last sound he ever made before Booth killed him. She opens the closet door, nothing. That's just a dress. She tells herself it's just a dream. And it happens again the next year. it happened again the next year. And to stop it from happening again, she bricks over that closet in its entirety. But yet she cannot bring herself to destroy the desk. In 1870, of course, she goes to Hanover, Germany, and never returns. The house, however, remained troubled every year on the fateful anniversary. In the 1890s, Governor of Massachusetts was visiting the Harris household, and he was facing a difficult decision, thinking about whether to support a bill that he knew in his heart was right, that would cost him politically. What day was it? You already know. April 14th. He wakes up at night to a most unusual sight. The ghost of Abraham Lincoln standing over him and glowering. In a panic, he reaches for the light and flicks it on, and the apparition disappears. A book falls across the shelf from across the room and lands open. He picks it up. The collected wit and wisdom of Abraham Lincoln. And here was a juicy little morsel, a passage flagged, seemingly perfect for the occasion. It read, "Hew honestly to the mark. Let the chips fall where they may." That's like an idiot. Let the chips fall where they may. And he did. In 1912, a year after his father's death, Rathbone's son, who survived by now a grown man and a member of Congress, comes back to the family home, takes the bricks down, takes the dress out, and at last burns the thing, seemingly ending the curse forever. One last story.